It was a regular evening in my old creaky house, and I had just wrapped up a long day. The clock had just struck 9 p.m., and I decided it was time for a relaxing shower before I hit the hay. Now, I'm a gal who lives alone, and I'm not ashamed to admit that sometimes my imagination runs wild, especially in an old house like mine. I turned on the water, letting the steam envelop the bathroom, and hopped into the shower. At first, everything was serene. The water was warm, and I could hear the gentle patter against the tiles. But, as I started to lather up, I began to notice something odd. Faint sounds, like the creak of a floorboard, the soft groan of a door. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly shut off the water to listen. Sure enough, there it was again. A faint, unmistakable creak from the direction of the kitchen downstairs. Now, this ain't my first rodeo with the weird noises in my house, so I brushed it off as the usual old house antics. But you know that feeling when your gut tells you something's not quite right? Well, mine was screaming at me to investigate. I grabbed my towel, wrapped it around myself, and tiptoed out of the bathroom. Chilly, and the darkness seemed thicker than usual. I peered down the hallway toward the staircase that led to the first floor. Another creak, followed by a distant thud. The sound seemed to echo through the house, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. Taking a deep breath, I descended the creaky stairs, each step accompanied by the unnerving symphony of old wood. The kitchen was bathed in a dim glow from a bulb hanging above. My heart raced as I cautiously moved forward, my wet footprints leaving a trail on the linoleum. As I reached the kitchen entrance, the unsettling feeling intensified. I was on edge, every sense heightened. My ears strained for any sound, my eyes darted around the room, and even the taste of fear seemed to linger on my tongue. And then it happened. A shadowy figure in the corner of my eye, a mere glimpse, a presence where there shouldn't have been one. My breath caught and I turned in a panic, my heart hammering in my chest. But there was nothing there, nothing but an empty kitchen, shrouded in silence. For a moment I thought maybe my imagination had truly run wild this time. Maybe I was exhausted beyond belief. But just as that comforting thought crossed my mind, another sound shattered it. The front door, slamming shut. I raced to the window overlooking the driveway and froze. There, in the dim glow of the streetlight, was a figure walking away from my house, down the driveway, disappearing into the night. My heart pounded against my ribs as I tried to make out any details, but it was too dark to see much. It took me a moment to collect myself, but once I did, I dialed the police faster than I ever thought possible. When they arrived, they combed the area, but there was no trace of anyone. No signs of a break-in, no footprints leading to my door. Just the unsettling feeling that someone had been there in my home, watching, listening. Now, I'm not one to easily buy into spooky tales, and I've never been one to entertain notions of ghosts or otherworldly beings. But that night, the terror I felt was all too real. Someone had been in my house watching me, waiting for the right moment. To this day, I shudder at the thought of what might have happened if I hadn't listened to my gut and investigated those noises. I realized that night that danger can often be the closest when we least expect it. It's easy to dismiss our instincts, to convince ourselves that we're overreacting or being paranoid. But as I replayed those moments in my mind, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the fear that had driven me to investigate. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe it was intuition, but whatever it was, it had saved me from potentially walking into a nightmare. I mean, if I had not noticed. Would he wait around till I went to bed and fell asleep? Was he just stealing? Like, what was this person really up to? In the days that followed, I took every precaution imaginable. New locks, security systems, and even a trusty baseball bat by my bedside became my new normal. But beyond the physical measures, something else had changed within me. That night had shattered the illusion of safety I had built around myself, reminding me that darkness can exist in the most ordinary places. So let me just start by saying I never thought I'd be the type to share one of those creepy things happened to me stories. But here I am. I'm 17 and was stuck in a house that's kinda in the middle of nowhere while my parents and siblings are off on some family trip. My plan for the evening was simple: have the house to myself, order some takeout, and then dive into my beloved video games until the wee hours of the morning. Seemed like a solid way to spend my time, especially considering the quiet surroundings and the fact that I wouldn't be disturbed. Things were going smoothly as I stuffed my face with pizza. and I had just started playing when I heard this weird noise. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then it sounded like footsteps, like someone walking around outside. I paused the game, straining my ears to listen, but the noise stopped. I chalked it up to my overactive imagination and continued gaming. Then, a while later, it started again. This time it was clearer. Footsteps, no doubt about it. But here's the thing. My parents weren't due back until next week. That meant either they'd come back early, which was unlikely, or something else was going on. I pulled up the blinds, peering out into the dark night. Yeah, I know it sounds like a horror movie cliché, but you can't blame me for wanting to make sure everything was fine. There, in the distance, I saw a figure. A person, standing in the yard. My heart started racing, and I couldn't help but feel a shiver crawl up my spine. I couldn't make out much about the person. It was too dark and they were a fair distance away, but I could tell they were just staring in the direction of the house. The worst part was, they weren't moving, just standing there. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking a bit as I dialed my parents, but they didn't pick up. I stared back at the figure for a few more moments before slowly pulling the blinds down. My mind was racing, thoughts of all those horror movies I'd watched rushing through my head. I tried to convince myself that it was probably just some lost traveler or a neighbor, but deep down, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. I spent the rest of the evening on edge, every little creak and rustle making me jump. I even thought I heard faint tapping on the windows a couple of times, but when I'd look, there'd be nothing there. Eventually, sheer exhaustion caught up with me, and I managed to convince myself that I was just letting my imagination run wild. I crawled into bed, my heart still racing, but I figured if I could just close my eyes and focus on getting some sleep. I fell asleep pretty fast, but in the middle of the night, I jolted awake. I lay there in the dark for a moment, trying to shake off that groggy feeling and figure out what had woken me up. That's when I heard it again. Those sounds, definitely not just the wind, were echoing through the house, like footsteps. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I listened, every nerve in my body screaming that something was very wrong. I was no longer trying to convince myself that I was overthinking things. There was no denying it. There were people inside the house. My heart pounded in my chest and I had to take a deep breath to steady myself. I knew I had to act. I had to figure out what was going on. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, my heart practically pounding out of my chest. I tiptoed to my bedroom door, straining my ears to listen for any signs of movement. It was like a horror movie come to life, except this was my life, and I was the guy in it. Gritting my teeth, I edged the door open just a crack, trying to get a sense of where those sounds were coming from. As I stepped out into the hallway, I felt the cold floor beneath my feet. Goosebumps raced up my arms and the dread just kept building with every step I took. I felt like I was in a game, my senses heightened as I tried to stay as silent as possible. I peeked into the living room, then the kitchen, and that's when I saw it. The back door was slightly ajar. Panic surged through me. I knew for sure now that someone was in the house, and I had no idea who they were or what they wanted. My mind raced, and I quickly shut the back door, my hands trembling. But then I noticed something. Mud. Like fresh mud, leading from the back door towards the basement. It was as if someone had tracked it in. My heart sank. Every horror movie cliché filled my thoughts, but I couldn't just stand there frozen. I knew I had to act, had to figure out what was going on. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my ears, and started following the trail of mud. But let me tell you, no way in hell was I going down into that basement. No way. I hesitated at the top of the basement stairs, my heart racing. The idea of going down there where I couldn't see anything was just out of the question. So I decided to backtrack, to quietly make my way back to my room and call the police. I reached for my phone and dialed 911, my fingers shaking as I held the device to my ear. As I whispered into the phone explaining the situation, I made my way back to my room. I locked the door behind me, my heart still pounding like a jackhammer. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher, waiting for the cops to arrive, all while desperately hoping that whoever was in my house wouldn't figure out where I was hiding. The dispatcher told me to stay put and wait for the police to arrive. So there I was, alone in my room, trembling and terrified, listening to every creak and rustle, wondering if whoever was in the house knew I was onto them. I could now hear the approaching sirens wailing nearby. I think the intruders could too, Their rumbling in the basement stopped for a while, and I could hear they ran up the stairs from the basement. To my luck, the police was already in the house and greeted the intruders just as they came out of the basement. I felt like a superhero, a terrified superhero. We finally got my parents on the phone, and they were shocked to hear about it all. They said they would come home as soon as possible. As I sit here in my room today writing this, I can't help but replay those chilling moments in my head. And let me tell you, it's going to be a long while before I feel safe in this house again, if ever. I thought I'd share this crazy experience that happened to me and my girlfriend a while back. It was a night that started out like any other girl's night in, but man, did it take an unexpected twist. Let me set the scene for you. It was just me and my girlfriend Jenny at my place, a cozy little house tucked away far from the city lights. My boyfriend was out of town and I didn't want to be alone. You know how that goes. We were all about having a relaxing night, catching up on movies and enjoying each other's company. Everything was going great until the doorbell rang. Now, it wasn't unusual for the occasional solicitor or neighbor dropping by, but it was a bit odd for someone to show up this late at night. I peeked through the window and there stood this guy claiming he'd crashed his car and needed to use our phone. Seemed legit at first, but something in my gut just didn't sit right. Jenny and I exchanged glances, both of us unsure about letting this stranger in. I mean, he looked pretty put together for someone who'd supposedly been in a car accident. So we told him through the closed door that we couldn't help him and suggested he try the neighbor's house, which was just a bit down the road. That's when things took a turn for the worse. The guy's face went from calm to seriously angry in the blink of an eye. I mean, it was like a switch had flipped. He started demanding that we let him in, his tone getting more aggressive by the second. I swear that shift in his demeanor was enough to give anyone the creeps. We stood our ground, not about to let a stranger into our home, especially when his story seemed fishy. But this guy, he wasn't having any of it. He started pacing around outside, tapping on different windows as if he was trying to find a way in. My heart was pounding like crazy, and I could feel the tension in the air. Then, out of nowhere, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the house. The guy had picked up some rocks and started throwing them through the windows. Glass was flying everywhere, and we were both terrified. We grabbed our phones, dialed the police, and huddled in the corner, watching this guy continue his rampage from outside. He was shouting threats and insults, just completely unhinged. The cops couldn't arrive fast enough, let me tell you. When they finally did, the guy must have sensed it because he took off into the night, disappearing into the darkness. The police searched the area but couldn't find him anywhere. They took our statements, filed a report, and assured us they'd increase patrols in the area. Needless to say, that night was a roller coaster of fear and anxiety. Jenny and I couldn't believe how quickly things escalated from a simple doorbell ring to a full-blown terror. It was a reality check, a reminder that sometimes danger can be right at your doorstep. If there's one thing I've learned from this, it's to always trust your instincts and prioritize your safety. And for anyone listening, take a word of advice. Always be cautious, even in the most unexpected situations. You never know who might be lurking just outside your door.